Hey guys, thank you for coming out to our Gaysian panel. I know, there's so many of you, we're so stoked. So what I'm going to do before we do our introductions is introduce kind of some of the language that we're going to use throughout the panel. So the first stop is going to be our definition of queer and how we're going to use it. So queer we use obviously in the sense of non-straight. So anywhere on the spectrum, sexuality, gender non-conforming, etc. In addition to that, we're also going to be using queer in the sense of it being something that is not of the norm. So in this sense, it's going to be a cultural type of thing. Asian cultures are queered from Western cultures because they're so othered. We don't have any kind of similarities for the most part to Western cultures aside from like what colonialism brought us. So that's going to be how we're going to be using queer today. We're also going to be talking a little bit about Orientalism, which is going to be both in the sense of how a lot of films kind of exoticize Eastern Asian ethnicities, and also kind of broadening that spectrum. I'm not sure if anybody read, there was a recent article at BuzzFeed that talked about Orientalism in specific relation to Isle of Dogs. In this article, the author really talked about how Orientalism, the history of it kind of spanned from how Western culture is considered Middle Eastern cultures all the way east and southeast. So we're going to take that into consideration and kind of talk about how that idea of like owning a culture that is so different from yours feeds into the way that Western representation of Asian cultures kind of, you know, presents itself. And Orientalism, again, it can also take different forms. I'm sure all of you have experienced or have seen different forms of Orientalism. It can go from like the very blatant kind of stuff that we saw in old Hollywood to more like subtle affirmations of Asian women and their kind of submissiveness. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce our panel. So over here, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves, how they identify, and what their kind of hallmark piece of like Asian representation was for them.
Hey y'all, I'm Nicole. I go by she, they pronouns. I'm a gender and sexuality studies major at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. My hallmark Asian character, I think aesthetically, I hella identify with Jubilee. But I'm trying to think, there are other parts of other characters that I also identify with, like, I identify with Cora in terms of like PTSD, and there's so much that I can't think of right now, but I will get back to you. I'm so sorry.
Nicole.
Chloe.
Struggling.
What am I supposed to answer again?
Oh
yeah, I'm Chloe. And a hallmark character that I find I identify with, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a struggle because representation's lacking. I would say like bits and pieces of lots of characters.
Yeah.
And like, cause as a journalist, Lois Lane, but she's straight and white, which is confusing. Right? But like that drive. Or I kind of want to say like Vivian, Saving Face, because I've dealt with so many confused straight girls and, you know, sad lesbians. I can identify with that too. And but then like Cosima, because she's a pothead. But like bits and pieces, right? Yeah. That's what I think.
I relate very much to the bits and pieces aspect of that. That because we have a lack of representation, that is what we will do. We will look for bits and pieces of ourselves and other characters, and then there's just that cognitive dissonance that becomes just this undercurrent that we don't even register. That it's like, oh, she doesn't look like me, but like, she's also dating a girl, so yeah. It's so rampant that we don't realize it anymore. I think that's like something that we should always be acknowledging. I'm Diane, sorry.
There it is.
I'm Diane Chen. I use she, they pronouns also. I am like queer, polybinary, non-binary question mark. I actually really liked Mulan. Yeah. Because like, now that I think about it, like gender presentation was like, she queered. And so I really like, I dated a guy named Chen in high school.
The animated Mulan, or like the Once Upon a Time Mulan?
Or the Jaways Mulan.
Oh yeah, or like the real historical one.
Or the one that didn't cast me when I sent in a tape that's supposedly happening in 2019. I don't believe when I see it. All the cartoon.
And then, yeah, is that it? Yeah, am I done? Here.
She just leaves. And I'm Maya. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm an Indian American. Yes, from India. And I'm queer. And I guess my hallmark queer moment in terms of like specific ethnic identification would be Kalinda from The Good Wife, because she was Indian and bisexual and kicked some ass. And I was like, wait, what? Do I need to binge watch 5 seasons of this just to watch 2 minutes? Which I did for the sake of my thesis. So let's get into it. So what do you guys think of like the state of, I guess we started talking about this like undercurrent of like representation and how like as Asian Americans we have to kind of not only seek out characters that like we identify with in terms of sexuality, but also characters that kind of mirror our like own ethnic experiences, whether it be like straightforward and completely the same ethnicity, or you know just like like for me, for example, I love Fresh Off the Boat, and it's like amazing. Everyone in the world is sleeping on it, and I will fight for the death to like push for that show to get more recognition. But I'm not Taiwanese American, yet I see so much of my family in it.
Yeah. Yes. I feel that way about one day at a time.
In terms of family, like the Joy Luck Club. Yes. You guys remember that one?
Yeah.
It was one of the only Asian representation films, right? And it was in 1996 or something. 22 years. Or no, Mulan. Wasn't it? The Voice of Mulan? Oh. Ming Na. Yeah, she was in it. But I would say like there's complexities with mothers and daughters, right? It had nothing to do with queerness, but culturally I think it represented me.
Which is something that Chloe and I have talked about a lot in representation of Asian cultures. It's so family driven. Like the majority of Asian cultures are focused on like the family and like the cliche of like you must not bring dishonor to your family.
Mulan or your cow.
Mulan. And Chloe and I have been talking about how it's interesting how we portray that in the Western media, because sometimes these family ideals can be in contradiction with Western ideas of feminism.
Yeah, so a lot of the time. But we were also talking about how we're talking about Asian representation. Asian is such an umbrella term. It covers the yellow Asians and the brown Asians, and they're not always the same. But we like kind of cling on to that representation in family altogether, right? So at this point, we feel like we're the same, which is awesome and kind of brings that sense of solidarity and unity. But it's difficult because we're so other to mainstream white society and
Like the mainstream otherness.
yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
You made a noise just how and that. I don't know, I was just wondering if you had something more to say. Like, hello. You're Filipino.
I identify as Filipino.
And I know that there's a lot of discrimination within Asian cultures towards Filipinos, as well as like within like the United States. Like kind of been a discrimination from like not really understanding Filipino culture. So how do you feel like that plays into your like?
So how do I navigate my life as a Filipino American, not really seeing myself represented in media? I think this goes back to what Chloe was saying about finding yourself in other characters, because I'm just not going to find myself in the media, which is kind of a bummer. Yeah. So I think that like I just try to find solidarity with other Asian folk, and I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly.
No, you're fine. It's very open.
No, it's hard. It is how do I say this? So I love Clark and Lexa, but it's hard to love them when I don't see myself in them.
Yeah.
And so where do I turn to in order to find that kind of content? And so, of course, Sami, I see a Sami is right there.
It's really cool to see that like there's a shift kind of towards more recognition, or characters having more ownership over their kind of ethnicities, which is really cool.
But not letting it limit them, because that's the thing. Is like when culture is used as like a limiting factor or like an obstacle, I'm also not particularly interested in that. As an obstacle in like a dramatic fashion.
Or like a plot device
Yeah.
for a white character to understand themselves by getting cultural, by getting information. And they're like, and then it's about their evolution.
It's static.
Yeah.
The Asian characters stay static.
Because they're there as a plot device tool.
Which is like another form of Orientalism. It's like to maintain that like, oh yes, like so beautiful this Asian culture, but it's still like the Westerner that does it better than the Asians. So therefore there's no like being Asian or being of that culture doesn't have any validity on its own until someone from the outside comes in and is like, I'm better at it than you.
Yeah, and so they're therefore telling our stories.
Exactly.
What is that? I'm not even gonna say his name. There's this.
Can you talk about the new Karate Kid movie?
No, not that one.
There's
The
none.
new Jeremy.
I think it's on Netflix.
Oh yes.
About he like infiltrates the Japanese. Yes. I saw that and I was like, this is kind of right.
Surely anything that I was involved in could probably
I'm
guaranteed to be problematic. So there's
How
that.
tone deaf do you have to be? At least, I don't know.
Have to be Jared Leto.
Or willfully ignorant.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe it's willful. Well, I think that's a challenge here, right? With identification and finding representation. Already there was such a struggle to get women in I'm kindly answering your question.
Oh yes.
It was already hard to get women in leading roles. And then adding the layer of a queer woman to a leading role was another challenging thing for showrunners and the media and audiences to like kind of grapple with in terms of understanding. And then adding ethnicity on top of that, like a culture like an Asian or a person of color, is even more inaccessible for so many people because it's so queer.
Yeah, too much.
It's too much, and I think one of the things that I've been trying to figure out the answer to, I don't know if you guys have the answer to this, is how do we normalize that? How do we make it accessible? When are we going to find a time where we don't have to rely on a television series or a film with a white character that happens to have an ethnic friend?
What is happening on the web?
Streaming shows? You think that's true?
Yeah,
I have a fun stat for you then.
This was unpremeditated.
LGBT representation, 77% of the people on screen are white. That's 23% that are people of color.
Is that like network television or
Streaming services. That's like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu. This was from your
Right.
color representation panel. I feel like I cheated. Spoiler alert.
I meant the level below that, like the grassroots, like where Carmilla came from.
Well,
Sort
then
of.
you also have web series like Brown Girls, which
Yeah.
have an HBO.
Which is now-
or-
yeah.
Okay, but like Carmilla is a very interesting example of a piece of branded content, which was a marketing device that blew up to be a piece of content because the representation was lacking so hard. It wasn't meant to be like, you know what I mean, like a big series. It was to sell tampons. And, but no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But that, if anything, should be something people look to understand where representation is lacking, that people are essentially getting excited over a commercial. It's an advertisement.
Yeah.
But like, and then basically it was audiences that turned fans, that turned that series into a hit show.
Yeah.
But it was a piece of content marketing. I know this because I work in content marketing. And we're like, that was brilliant. Kotak, you by Kotak's nailed it.
Yeah.
But that totally feeds into your point of like how do we normalize it?
Exactly.
Like how do we get like an Asian thing to be so normalized that we can be like, yes, we need to sell tampons with this.
Without fetishizing it.
Yeah, without fetishizing.
You know, I was talking to a friend about this yesterday. About I feel like I've seen this trend of like Trojan horsing in TV, and I felt like it started with like Orange Is the New Black, where we were like, oh, look at this white woman named Piper. Let's follow her story, and that's not what that show is. Like, we use Piper to like Trojan horse into this world, and they're like, no, these are the stories you need to watch. These are the stories that are important. I feel like the Bold Type is doing that in sort of their tone and marketing. They're like, oh, we're just a magazine like Cosmo, and then they're slamming into these issues. They're slamming into immigration and sexuality and sexual assault and all this stuff. And I feel like it's happening in a way, like a very self-aware sort of Trojan horsing way. And I think my show doesn't really acknowledge the fact that my character is Asian in any particular way, but it's there and it's visually, you know, and when people watch it, it's just something that they see and they're like, oh, okay, I guess it is also sci-fi. So that's another thing, is I think sci-fi in general is one of those Trojan horse things where sci-fi is a great platform to display otherness as mainstream.
Because they also have
And also,
right? I think that's problematic, right?
It's like
when we think of sci-fi, right?
What?
The fact that that's the opportunity to introduce otherness because they're aliens. That's
and
like,
also
that's a problem.
The overuse of like Japanese culture to denote futurism, without any like substantive like aspects to it.
I was really shocked by the amount of that in Blade Runner.
But Blade Runner was like built off of that. I haven't seen Blade Runner. It's just like a
So I wonder if to make Asianness more mainstream is to kind of take the showrunners to task of these like more mainstream shows and be like, hey, yeah, that's cool, but that's real white. Or like, yeah, that's cool, that's real gay, but like y'all ain't got no Asians on your show. So I wonder if like to take showrunners to task like via Twitter. And all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it does have to come from much more from top down, and I think actually the writers' room is actually where it has to.
Yeah.
I think so too. I think it's the writers' room because the producers aren't going to do it. The casting directors are like, oh yeah, she's just better. It just happens that she was, and it's like no, in the writers' room, if the writers have the authentic stories to write, and because if in the writers' room it starts that they are manufacturing roles.
Yeah.
Things that are not real. Like if you start with Splenda, that is a terrible metaphor. What was I saying? You start with Splenda in your coffee, then it what?
And addictive.
Yeah. On that note of Splenda, talking about like taking showrunners to task,
Yeah.
we also run into the model minority assumption of Asians, that a lot of non-Asian people or non-informed people don't consider Asian cultures or ethnicities as minorities, because in a very stereotypical fashion, very visible Asians are very successful. So because they're very successful, they're no longer a minority. I think
Well, it's a privilege thing, right?
yeah, the privilege thing. It's just because, there are a lot of doctors who happen to be Asian doesn't mean that they are removed from facing any discrimination.
Yes. The intersectionality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because classism is an issue.
Yeah.
So we have Asians that aren't deemed as blue collar or lower class, but they still, don't have the privileges of white people. And they call it the bamboo ceiling in the workplace,
Yeah.
right? Where you have lots of Asians in the workforce, but they're not there. It's a thing, and they're not there in senior level positions. And that's the issue, right? Because you can only get so high up the corporate ladder as a model minority.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can be a doctor, but are you the chief? You know what I mean? There's a lot of that, and I think that I see this a lot in journalism. It's there's more, there are more Asian reporters now, but even in the class that I was in, it was, I think there were 2 of us in an entire year, and that's to go into the workforce. And now that we're in the workforce, every editor, every publisher is white.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still, and who controls that media, right? It's going to be the white people. So you still have that role, and you're still, a token. And, your white coworkers love being friends with you because it makes them so eclectic. I think I've heard that before, that's why.
I love robots.
I like real sushi. Kimchi? I'm not Korean.
You just keep saying kimchi.
Kimchi. Like a code word. And I do make excellent dumplings. That's a true stereotype in case yeah, that's real.
So I also wonder if we, as Asian folks, need to have conversation with each other about the model minority.
100%.
Because that shit is hell to internalize.
Yeah.
I definitely observe that in other Asians, so I wonder if that is a conversation that we should have with each other.
Yeah, the Asian hierarchy.
Yeah.
That I'm still trying to teach my father about, and it's not a thing.
Yeah.
Again, family stuff, right? So you have to kind of, I think the interesting thing about Asians, it kind of brings back what you were saying about valuing family, is you can, I don't know if you've heard this too, but you end up educating your entire giant family on queerness.
Oh yeah.
And anti-racism, because let's be honest, Asians sometimes have a bad habit of that. Well, my family does, for sure. Yeah. Where they're
absolutely.
oh, but it's Korean. And I'm so? Not like us. I'm what do you mean? Or it'll be but he's half Vietnamese. And I'm yeah, right? You get that a lot at home. You have to kind of help them, and you're okay.
My family does the inter-India racism, where they're Punjabi, they're not like us. And I'm
yeah, they do it all the time. Yeah, and Hong Kong is a whole different place.
Yeah. Which I also never understood.
The Hong Kong thing.
Well, both of them, Taiwan and Hong Kong.
Taiwan and Hong Kong, yeah, they for some reason get treated very differently than China.
Would you say that that's a colonizing tool?
I was gonna say we have our own history.
That's true. That's because Hong Kong was colonized by the British.
The way the wars.
And they think they're better than us now.
And so this intra-racism that's happening is adopted white supremacy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think maybe to go to our families and talk about how being anti-black or whatever, perpetuating that white supremacy does not ultimately benefit us.
No.
Yeah.
There's no hierarchy. At the end of the day, we're all still at the bottom in terms of white supremacy.
The cool thing about that is that we have people our generation who are we're not kind of kowtowing to that idea of the hierarchy, and we're questioning it. And we're not going to be like our parents who felt the need to abstain from political demonstrations and standing with civil rights movements because they were afraid that it would jeopardize their position in society.
Or their lives.
Or their lives, yeah. And now we have like a whole generation, like we have a room full of people that are probably like, okay, fuck this. Like we're not going to just like sit down and like let everybody walk over us. We want to see actual change, which is pretty cool.
Internalized racism is a product of colonialism.
Yeah.
And that's like what you're taught. It's like if you have an accent, then you're a different kind of Asian.
I call myself out on the daily for this kind of thing, for these kind of
It's
things.
hard.
Like every day taking the, I'm from New York. Like every day taking the train, it's like I have to do work internally about like the things that I'm thinking when I'm looking at the people who come onto this train or who are sitting next to me or that come on and are loud or you know, take up space or whatever. And it's like constantly I'm just like evaluating myself on and having to just really dig super, super deep and like how much of that is internalized, where did it come from, how much of it is institutionalized. I grew up in this country, like I'm not an immigrant, I was born in Texas. And then I am not there anymore. And like I have to do that every single day.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? Representation goes beyond this screen.
Yeah.
Representation is every day, and I think it's hard for, I see a lot of fellow people of color here. I think that one of the hard things too is when you see, because you don't have that representation in film and television, sometimes you walk down the street and you see someone of your race, or that a shared, like visible, who looks like you, who's doing something stupid, and you're like, oh my god. That's I'm gonna think we're all like now.
No, but have any of you watched the Wild Wild West the documentary about the cult on Netflix? I couldn't keep watching it because I was like, I can't handle Indians doing crazy shit. And I'm like, I know that there are crazy, like there are crazy people everywhere, but I was just like, no, I can't do it. This is not okay. This is like not good for representation, and I already turned it off.
Yeah, that's the one my family I think struggles with most, is like when they see like an Asian guy or lady porking in Chinatown, which happens, and they're like, oh, I'm a farmer. And I'm like, okay, you gotta stop using that.
Yeah.
Also, agriculture is amazing. Like, breakfast.
That gets one in your mouth.
Yeah. We're
I'm very hungry.
Yeah.
I might just, my pouch.
I'm gonna pull out the pouch.
I might literally right now do this. In fact, now that I'm looking at it.
I think it's really interesting how bringing it back to Fresh Off the Boat has been kind of dealing with some of these issues and kind of subverting some of the stereotypes that we have about Asians. And what I love about Fresh Off the Boat is the showrunner is Persian American. So what's really cool about it is you have like a writer's room that has like writers like Ali Wong and other Asian writers. I can't think of any other writers on it, which is awful. But you have Asian writers in the writer's room. You have Asian actors, right? So they're who run the gamut of different Asian cultures too. So you're able to tell like this story, yes, it might be about a Taiwanese American family, but it's imbued with perspectives from different cultures, which I think, at least for me, is what makes it like so relatable and so like groundbreaking, I think, in its representation.
And that's why the writers' rooms are so important. It's,
Writers' rooms are very important. I also.
I have a question. Talking about the writer's room, and as an ally, close influencer with Asian Americans, I fan hard for Belinda Lowe, because she is life. If you don't know who she is, look her up. And I'm thinking about the book to movie thing, and why she hasn't, and how we can do that, because she is life. Right, yeah, because she does Asian American queer, she does Asian American super as queer warriors, punches, and she's got other projects coming up that center Asian American characters.
I think it's like it's a funding issue, right? Like, I mean, we should all just band together and fund her to get these projects made, and then on the flip side, it's like the reason why we would seemingly have to do that is because the predominantly white cis men who are in charge of funding these projects are like, nah, like we don't need to see that. Or like why do we need to see these stories? Which, I mean, is really cool because we've had like a whole like host of movies and TV shows like the past year that have like proven, like Girls Trip, Wonder Woman, Black Panther have been like, hey look, like movies can really blow office numbers and they're not centered with white dudes.
I'm going to say something that's really pro-ClexaCon. I think one of the most important things ClexaCon has done is shown people that there is an audience that cares.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's a value there in media and a space for us. I think that's one great thing about this convention. Speaking of it, I think that's
here we're not going.
Yeah, but I think that's a big deal. I think that's in terms of getting funding, in terms of like understanding that there are queer ladies out there and folks that want to see this on screen and are willing to support it and will put money towards it.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge message.
You got a question back there?
Yeah,
Or comment?
I did.
Go for it.
Hi, Rebecca.
I'm Rebecca, Dr. Hall, and I teach critical race theory. And one of the things I came to understand is that Asians are constructed as always already foreign, you know, like the U.S. law and understanding and culture. And I was wondering how you saw, if you see that too, and then how it impacts the lack of representation.
Yeah, I think that for, at least this comes from my experience being raised by immigrant parents, is that tying into the model minority thing is to become American is to become invisible and to conform and do what the Americans do. There's like a certain level of losing your cultural identity in that. I speak Mandarin, I'm fluent, and I studied it, and I can read and write and speak. My brother cannot. He got so much pressure in school just to be American that like he did away with like an entire language. Like he just like shut it out of his brain, and that's really rough. I think specifically for Asian sort of immigrants, the experience of becoming an American, right, which is the goal when you come to America, is to become sort of invisible and
To assimilate.
to assimilate. So I've talked myself into forgetting what your original question was, which is really
I just want, like, for example, like, the first national immigration laws in the United States were based on Asian exclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So-
Canada, you guys did that.
And-
Big time in Canada.
Yeah, and so there's this way in which it's just, it just influences so much about, how you perceive Asians, and I'm curious about how you think it would affect your experience of it.
So really interesting on the immigration part, specifically talking about Indian immigration. I'm reading this book called The Other 1%, which is talking about how did this like really tiny minority in a very, very short time span become one of the most successful minorities like in the United States. And so it traces immigration, and one of the really interesting things, I'm not going to remember any of the specific dates right now, but in the Civil Rights Movement, there were a couple Supreme Court cases.
The early 1930s.
Yeah, that like basically said that Indian Americans were white. And so for a very long time, Indians in the United States on the census were considered white. Until like the 60s, and when the Civil Rights Movement started getting steam and ramping up, then Indians were like, wait, holy shit, like we're considered white, but like we still face a ton of discrimination, and like we have no protection because people are like, oh, you're white, you can't have discrimination. So that's when Indian Americans started kind of fighting for recognition as not being white, as we obviously are not. And I think that specific example, for me, like reading about that was really interesting because it feeds directly into this model minority, or this idea of assimilation. It was like we were hiding in the United States, we were hiding under that whiteness label in order to like gain success, until it was like, oh no, this is like detrimental to who we are. And I think that's still exists in the way that we look at minority. We're still looking at Asians as being represented on the screen as doctors or lawyers or economists, or like if there's like a recurring theme that like if an Asian child is not going to become one of these high professions, then it's like, oh my god, shame.
Yeah, so to come back to like how that needs to be in representation, I do think that we've had enough of feeling like, oh, like this Asian girl is just like you. She goes to school and gets bullied and forgets her locker combo and stuff. Maybe it does have to be like.
Who is not Korean. She's Mrs. Josh Chan's mom from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, if any of you watch. Anyway, she was cast as being as playing a Korean mother in Blackish. And she's just like not, like one of my Korean friends texted me, she was like, she doesn't look, like she just is not Korean. Like why did they just...
She doesn't even look Korean?
She doesn't even look Korean.
You know what the worst part is?
She, like,
that's still better than Emma Stone playing Asian.
So I think, well, that goes into the monolith of Asian. It's like the assumption that, oh, close enough.
I am right now in pre-production for a series that I'm about to start producing called Sideways Smile. Shameless plug. It's called Sideways Smile, and it was brought to me by a friend of mine named Hong. She's Vietnamese American. And she wrote it about a Vietnamese American lead, and she was like, I want you to produce it, I want you to be in it. And I was like, cool, that's really awesome. Like, as an actor, I'm like, hire me, please. By the way, hire me, please. And we were really excited about it. We started developing the script and talking about it, and the more that we started talking about it, I was like there's like scenes where like the character goes home and chats with mom, and it's in Vietnamese, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just learn it. And I was like, what the fuck? What? And then Hong and I met up again, and Hong was like, you know what, like I think we have to cast a Vietnamese American actor. And I was like, I'm on this exact same page. We have to. You're right that Asia becomes this blurry filter we put on any yellow or sometimes brown skin, and it's not great. That being said, like that this is a very like indie level project. I don't even know what that is in Hollywood. Like we've heard about Amanda Stenberg?
Wait, I know this.
They came forward about, passing on a part in Black Panther, benefiting from light skin, that sort of stuff. So I think it is.
That's
so
actor's
really
responsibility. You happen to be an accountable actor, right? But it is a very competitive industry. So when they're offered a role, it's really hard for them to say, you know what?
That's what
this
I
is
did.
the wrong thing.
Yeah.
No, you did it because you were like, but you're a good one. You took it. But like, I think, it's people like you that do promote the right message and do set a good precedent. But like, I think that that's a struggle for a lot of working actors, right? And this is why like intersectionality and stuff, and like if we're gonna bring up the class thing again, people need to eat. So they're like, this is employment for me. And how can I say no? And I don't know what their issues are or what their lives are like. So maybe they're not in a position to say no. I think they probably are. But like, do you know what I mean? I think that that's also something to keep in mind.
For sure, and to add on to that, I'm thinking about One Day at a Time, because they're not all Cuban American actors.
Yeah.
So sometimes it works. I think it's just like finding that balance.
Yeah.
Is what is key.
Or even just publicly acknowledging it. Like, I think we're in an age where actors cannot be willfully ignorant like puppets anymore.
Or creators for that. It's like
That's
if
why
you
we're all
can't
here,
find-
right?
Yeah.
Like, these actors who are playing women who are on the spectrum, they now have a responsibility to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. You? Yeah. But you, at the same time, go.
What's happening?
Okay,
Okay, let's go.
I love your chat.
I'm sorry, I know like almost out of time. I wanted to ask you about incidental Asianness, because we talked about like how many Asian stories are based in family dynamics, as opposed to say a Joan Watson, where it's like we're just gonna make her Asian and she's kind of free floating.
Lucy Liu.
Right.
One of the three. One.
Right. Even like when I was growing up, like the Asians who were on TV were Chris Yamaguchi and Michelle Kwan, who were like beautiful and amazing, but were completely, they were American skaters. They were separated from their Asian-ness.
Yeah.
And like, is there ever
Good
going to be a
Americans.
time
That's like the assimilation, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, they're not defined by their ethnicity, which like is something I know, like I don't want to be defined by my ethnicity.
I know,
but
it's like such a
in this
middle ground,
case,
like.
it's like when we're lacking so much representation, being defined by your ethnicity, I think, is very important. Or at least being, I don't know, like, I think defined is not the right word. but
Identifying with it.
acknowledging
Identifying with
Yeah.
it. And accepting it. And,
Oh, damn.
they're shutting this down. But I think that's really important, and I think that goes back to the whole assimilation thing. I, having been a former person that totally assimilated until I was about 18 and then 25, but you are forced into that role sometimes in Western society. I say Western because I'm Canadian, so when I say like, in like if you go to public school, a lot of the time you're forced into that. You want to hide your Asianness. You think that when you're called a banana, that's a compliment. It's not. You hear a lot of shit like, you're really pretty for an Asian girl.
Yeah, that's like a
You
part
get that.
of the, like, that's survival.
Struggle to assimilate.
I did the thing where I would start doing an Indian accent because I was like, oh, if I'm funny, if I take the ownership of the joke, then people will like me. And looking back on it, that is
It's
so
toxic.
toxic.
Internally
It was just
toxic.
very, very bad. Back there in the corner.
Something I think is really interesting at the crossroads of being queer and being Asian is mental health. Both those have representation in media as well as just on a day-to-day personal level, both because being queer and being Asian, we are likely afflicted or know someone who is, and so the idea of it's hard to be queer, it's hard to be Asian.
I just had a really weird interaction with a therapist a couple weeks ago where I was like, let me tell you. All right. But some of the things that I'm trying to work on in my own life is like understanding my identity. I'm at that point in my life where I want to get closer to my ethnic identity and my religious identity. How do I do that? How do I kind of just grapple with like the assimilated parts of me and like wanting to get closer to that, not knowing my native tongue, and then also like my queer identity, like how do I function as a queer person of color when sometimes Asians aren't considered people of color. And I had this white cis woman who was my therapist who was just like, oh, I have an Indian husband, I can help you with that. And I was like, oh, this is not great. And, but that's like a huge thing. Like that's a big thing that I've been trying to deal with is like understanding, oh, we're so close to no time. We are at no time. Basically, yes, talking about mental health, which is like a big stigma amongst Asian cultures. Like we need to talk about it more. And we need to be, and like, you know, having more visibility of like Asians who are in the mental health profession is huge because like, I mean, if I was talking to another Indian American or Indian person or literally any Asian person,
I'm also here.
Hi guys. Then that would have been a much more like, formative experience for me instead of like slightly invalidating. So I 100% we need more mental health. Just everywhere else.
Yeah. I think we're at time. Whoa, and there's people out there that